Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast. You may expect at this time of week to have our race review from Mid-Ohio, but with a very chaotic week in silly season as the seats get filled for 2027, we've got a bonus episode this week as we reflect on all the breaking news from the IndyCar driver market. Don't worry, our Mid-Ohio episode will be out probably on Wednesday. It should go out on Tuesday, so you'll have your Mid-Ohio review very shortly. We haven't forgotten about that. But with the major announcement on Monday, which is the day of recording, that Felix, Rosenqvist and Scott Dixon have joined Arrow McLaren for 2027, we think it's just worth touching on that news as a general episode and all the other driving market-related news rather than trying to combine it into our Mid-Ohio episode. Otherwise, it will get a bit of a chaotic and a bit of a long episode. So don't worry, Mid-Ohio review is coming, as we said. It's going to be a very busy couple of weeks episode-wise. We have a lot planned, so plenty of content. But let's start off with the biggest news of the silly season so far. That 25 years of Chip Ganassi Racing, Scott Dixon will make the move to Arrow McLaren in 2027. He'll be joined by Felix Rosenqvist, who returns to the team after 3 seasons with Meyer Shank Racing, and obviously Pato Ward retained in their lineup. We also had the confirmation that Ryan Hunter-Reay will be back for the 111th running of the Indianapolis 500 to filled out their 4-car lineup. So very big news today, Archie. One of those crazy days in the sporting world where the Hamilton to Ferrari, the Brady to Tampa Bay, whatever it is, it's the greatest of their generation, maybe the greatest of all time, making the blockbuster move to another key rival in pursuit of another championship, more glory, whatever it is. But I don't think we ever kind of envisioned the day that Scott Dixon would leave Chip Ganassi Racing.
It's been a wild week, really, since all of these reports first started to emerge, because I think none of us really thought with Dixon obviously coming to the end of his contract that he would leave. But yeah, here comes the day. Like, I mean, I wasn't born for 4 more years after the first time he drove for Ganassi. So that's kind of putting into context, like, the tenure that this has been. This is like, it's pretty unparalleled in sport generally, really, to have someone who has been at a team for that length of time, that successfully as well. And it was a shock, really, because, you know, it's been a quarter of a century, which is mad to put it that way. And I kind of just thought for all the world that Dixon would just retire at Ganassi because it's been his home forever and it just would have felt right. And they wanted that as a team. They offered him a multi-year deal, they said in their statement. But I don't know, like, I'm not begrudging the fact that he's decided to leave. I think in these latter stages of his career where obviously these past few years, Palou has really had the measure of him quite emphatically. So I think for Dixon, I would imagine the psychology behind this, at least somewhat, is really just wanting to try and get everything out at the end of his career, because I think he's probably accepted at this point he's not going to beat Palou in a straight fight. So by going to Arrow McLaren, who, you know, they've not proven to be close to a championship team really yet. I know Pato Ward finished second in the championship last year, but he was still only 200 points behind Palou. So Dixon's going to a team that are, I guess, a bit of a wild card among the real front runners. And I think it's pretty exciting. I think there's a few other factors to it as well. Obviously, they're going to have a hypercar program coming in sports cars as well. So I think for Dixon, maybe even post-IndyCar career, that's probably something that appeals. There's obviously the link with New Zealand as well in terms of Bruce McLaren and the history of the McLaren team. So I guess as a Kiwi, that probably appeals for Dixon as well. And yeah, I think in terms of the coupe for Arrow McLaren as well, it's almost looking long-term without getting a driver that's going to be there for the long term, because this is not peak Dixon. He's 45 years old. I think he's won 1 race in 39 races, I think is what I saw. So he's not at his best. He's not going to guarantee you race wins every week anymore, but he's hopefully going to lay some foundations for that team that can really carry them far into the future. So still the modern greatest driver, and I think it is still a pretty landmark coupe for Arrow McLaren.
It's obviously a landmark moment for Dixon, as I said. I don't think we could envision this happening, but your McLaren have been chasing Dixon for years and years, ever since they came to the series. People remember that they were extremely close to signing him in 2020 when they returned to the sport. Dixon at that time decided to stay with Ganassi. Obviously, since then, he hasn't won a championship. Obviously, won a fair few races, but no championships there. And as you kind of alluded to, I don't think he's going to beat Palou over the course of the season at this point in his career. And as you alluded to, it's a new challenge. Like, he could quite ceremoniously round out his career at Ganassi, but is it going to do much good finishing 8th, 9th in the championship? A team has already had so much success at, and just kind of have an underwhelming end to his career. Like, ultimately, this gives him that new challenge, that new impetus, and kind of about changing the culture and the environment at Arrow McLaren, which will be probably spoken about a little bit more. And it just opens up a lot of post IndyCar opportunities for Dixon. Like, as you mentioned, there's a big hypercar program. He wants to win Le Mans. He wasn't able to do it with Cadillac when Chip Ganassi had their program there. I'd imagine we're kind of a large interest in keeping him as kind of an advisory role, like we see, well, ultimately like what Canal was brought on for before he kind of evolved into becoming a team principal. What we've seen Ryan Hunter-Reay do in the last couple of years, and obviously, as you said, he's returning next year. And add Dixon to that portfolio, you've got 3 Indy 500 winners, kind of guiding that team at the helm. You've got decades upon decades upon decades of IndyCar experience. You probably have over 1,000 races between the 3 of them. That's a very wise and secure management structure, which is going to really help support that team. And obviously, McLaren have got very big ambitions. Like, the Formula One team is exceeding, obviously won the championships last year, and they never quite had that same success in IndyCar. And you feel like there's always been a lot of pressure to replicate that. And it's coming up to 7 years in the sport now. No Indy 500 victories, no IndyCar championship. Best finished second in the points, but even then, O'Ward was pretty much close to 200 points off Pelot, which isn't really close at all. It's a second place in the standings, not necessarily a second place in reality. It wasn't a good season as such, that given the gap to Pelot. So you can see why Dixon's left Ganassi, I think, is the first thing. Like, that new challenge, I said, is pretty important to him. But on the McLaren side, it's about bringing in that guy of experience, a guy to continue to push that team forward, who comes with years of technical experience, years of racing experience, and a philosophy and a mentality at Ganassi that has clearly worked for so many years.
And I think when I look at Arrow McLaren, I feel like they've almost been defined in recent years by obviously having a very high ceiling. You know, they've taken a lot of race wins, obviously with O'Ward, and now a couple with Lundgaard as well, and pretty regularly on the podium. I know, obviously, until O'Ward won at Mid-Ohio, he'd had 14 races without a podium, but you know, they have had successes. But at the same time, I think it's equally been defined by a team that's just been kind of, it feels like the gap has been pretty steady for several years now. I know, obviously, kind of the initial seasons were, you know, there were teething problems after first moving back into the sport, and then, you know, even when it feels like things should have stabilized, there's, you know, whether it's been things happening off track and such a regular kind of shuffling of personnel, or even just on track, like, it feels like they're often just a little bit confused. Like, from, I don't know whether an engineering perspective or what have you, like, there's been plenty of cases where they've had great weekends, and then the next weekend they are miles off the pace, and they don't really know why, and they can't figure out why. It was like, I thought Lundgaard's win at Road America was, you know, quite symbolic of this almost, that he's won the race and he's completely mystified by it, and he doesn't quite know how he's managed to do it, because he doesn't know why he was slow in the first place that weekend. And I think bringing someone in like Dixon, as you mentioned, Dan, has all of this wealth of knowledge from a team that has been at the very top of the sport, that, you know, since they've been in the sport, have been really the benchmark. I think it could really be invaluable for McLaren. And I think, you know, they've obviously had a very young lineup in the last couple of years with Siegel, O'Ward, Lundgaard, and just having someone with a lot more experience. And I know, obviously, you've got Kanan at the top, obviously, but you probably need that sort of serious veteran from a driving side. And I know O'Ward's got a decent amount of experience now, but it's incomparable compared to what Dixon should bring, and Dixon's knowledge of what works, what doesn't work. And I think their hope is he's probably just got to help eradicate some of this like perennial confusion they seem to have on race weekends. And yeah, I think looking forward as well, I think, you know, carrying on that kind of theme of, you know, him being very important from that development front, looking ahead to the new car in 2028 as well, he's a figure who could be really crucial to have on board to really help that transition as well.
And that's obviously one side of the announcement. The other factor is Felix Rosenqvist, who we already knew would be leaving Marshank Racing at the end of the season, also was confirmed to return to Arrow McLaren in 2027. Obviously, race for the team between 2021 and 2023. Never won for the team, but claimed a couple of podiums, a couple of pole positions. And was pretty well liked within the team. Obviously, we know he's got a pretty close relationship with Pat O'Ward, and they've had a friendship which has lasted for many years since, and obviously will return to that team as the defending Indianapolis 500 winner, which obviously, for one, comes with a lot of commercial benefits to the team. Having 2 Indianapolis 500 winners in a 3-car lineup, or 3 when you include Hunter Race, having 3 Indianapolis 500 winners in a 4-car lineup is pretty impressive. And as I said, commercial-wise, that's going to be pretty good benefit there for Arrow McLaren. But I guess the first thing to really delve into is maybe why he left Meyer Shank Racing. Like we said this a couple of times, he really made a home there. It felt like Arrow McLaren, it was a very weird stage when he reached that team initially. There was that whole Palou debacle where they looked like they wanted to get rid of him every year to try and get Palou, and then eventually Rosenqvist seemingly got a bit fed up and went to Meyer Shank Racing, who were a team who are underperforming pretty perennially. And then he really drives that team forwards. Got a couple of podiums now, a lot more consistent results. They're now a regular front runner, and obviously that kind of peaked this year at winning the Indianapolis 500. It'd been a weird couple of years for Rosenqvist at Shank still. Like, it'd been a bit patchy. There were times it was really good, times where it felt a bit anonymous for periods of time. Last year was a good season points-wise, but not necessarily performance-wise. Obviously, him and Armstrong were at a very similar level. And he started off the season pretty poorly. And like even then, there was a consideration, well, would Shank even want to keep him? Then had a good Long Beach run, and obviously kind of rounded out with that Indianapolis 500 victory. And that race really does change lives and careers. It's the difference of 0.02 seconds, which ultimately has probably been a significant factor into why we're speaking about Felix Rosenqvist ending up at Arrow McLaren. It's just the way that amazing race works. And it just gives Rosenqvist another opportunity at a top team. Was obviously at Ganassi, went to McLaren, and for him, it's a no-brainer move. Like, ultimately, without the Indy 500 win, you'd be thinking, okay, maybe what are his options? Someone a bit further down the field, but suddenly when you're in the limelight, and you know, he showed at other times this year, like Road America, like Long Beach, as I said, where he can still compete for victory in the right equipment under the right circumstances, and he can be a reliable driver, and that's exactly why Arrow McLaren decided to pick him back up.
I'm interested that you see it as a no-brainer move because, you know, personally, obviously, you know, his stint at the team was, you know, was solid at points, but when I guess you've got to look at the contrast between Rosenqvist and Lundgaard, and I know we'll get a bit more onto Lundgaard, but Rosenqvist raced 48 times for the team. He was on the podium 3 times, best of 8th in the championship. You look at what Lundgaard's done in 28 races. He's been on the podium 11 times. He's currently 3rd in points, and he was 5th in points last season.
I'm making this clear. This is a no-brainer for Rosenqvist, not McLaren.
No, I know, but this is the point I'm making, is that Rosenqvist didn't have, you know, he didn't have a wonderful time at the team, as you say. Like, they were trying to ship him out at certain points, and he was very much the bridesmaid, and I'm not sure he really thrived in that role. Whereas at Meyer Shank Racing, he has been absolutely the lead guy. He's been the figurehead. He's been the guy that they've been leaning on, and even when Armstrong's been there, I think it's been a pair that's worked very well, and they've kind of almost emerged as, I'd say, like co-leaders of that team, given how strong they've been. And I just wouldn't, you know, obviously Arrow McLaren is a step forward from Meyer Shank Racing, but I'm just not entirely sure it will prove that way for Rosenqvist if he kind of just ends up in the shadows again, because he's already a little bit streaky with Meyer Shank, and this is a team that has a technical alliance with Chip Ganassi Racing, and I think, you know, that's obviously a big loss for him that he now doesn't have that. You know, it's interesting whether you say he's driving a Ganassi car or not, but he's quite a streaky driver, and he's going to a team that have struggled with quite a bit of streakiness as well. And I don't know, I just think obviously he's won the 500 with the team, and that doesn't mean he's bound to stay there by any means. And I think it's, you know, fair play to him for taking advantage of that success and getting what you've got to imagine is a really good deal from Arrow McLaren, even though I think there were reports that Meyer Shank Racing did try and match that. But, you know, if they hadn't offered him a deal initially, is he questioning whether they really want him, whether it's just, I don't know. I don't know enough about that situation, but it is mad how much the 500 has changed things. It's not just even a lap. It is literally a fraction of a second. And it could have been the difference between him being out and facing, you know, looking at scraping the barrel of teams that he could be joining for next season. And obviously now being a team that is a front runner, obviously, and one of the big 4. So yeah, it's just turned him from being on the brink to kind of super coveted again. But I'm just not sure. I mean, time will tell, and it could work out really well and getting the second chance. But it's the whole not going back to your ex kind of thing, and it didn't work out particularly well there last time in the end. Like it was decent and he showed speed, but I really felt like he found a home. So I think in some ways it is a bit of a gamble, but at the same time, like I really don't begrudge him for making a move.
I mean, yeah, you're at a top team on a multi-year contract.
But I also, like, my argument is that I think Meyer-Shank Racing are emerging into a similar force.
But will you think Meyer-Shank have a better chance of winning another Indy 500, another championship than McLaren?
Probably not a championship, but McLaren seemingly don't care about the championship.
Well, yeah, but
I'm not don't care.
Ultimately, he's got to look at his best chances, and I think his best chance to get a good result. And I think the other factor is the team is very different to what he was at 3 years ago. Like, new shop, completely new management structure. Dixon's going to be a lot different to the teammates he was having at the time then. I think the environment is so different that obviously it's still the same team, but I think there is going to be a lot different in comparison. From a McLaren perspective, I think this is the one that will get a little bit more intrigued than the Dixon side, given the fact he has raced for the team before and had limited success, as we mentioned earlier, and the fact that maybe there are more exciting or ambitious options that McLaren could go for in the current market. And Christian Lundgaard is somebody we're obviously going to speak about a lot, as it effectively feels like Rosenqvist is a bit of a replacement for Lundgaard in this circumstance. As I said, for McLaren starting off commercially, very good to have the Indianapolis 500 winning your team. Has a good team dynamic, as we know, with O'Ward. There's been suggestions he gets on with Dixon pretty well too, so that makes a pretty strong team chemistry for starters.
Has spoken glowingly about Rosenqvist on a lot of occasions from when they were teammates. So again, that chemistry, harmonious factor.
So that's an element of it as well. Rosenqvist has been reported to be somebody who gives very good technical feedback, again, which is something that McLaren needs because, as you mentioned, performance, they don't really know why things struggle. Maybe they lack that kind of in-depth technical feedback that you're going to get from somebody like Dixon or even Rosenqvist. So, and when you have an O'Ward, Siegel, Lundgaard lineup all pretty young and lack general IndyCar experience, compared to someone like Dixon and Rosenqvist, that's going to be a huge influx of technical information there that they can provide. So that's really the main benefits of why Arrow McLaren have done this, because I know some people will be maybe a little bit bemused as to why they've signed Rosenqvist over Lundgaard, but we'll obviously touch on the other side of the argument in a little bit.
Yeah, I guess this is a nice way to segue to that. I think, it's important to put into context that essentially it appears that Arrow McLaren are desperate to win the Indy 500, and that is their overriding priority over all of this. And signing Rosenqvist over keeping Lundgaard would absolutely point towards that, because Lundgaard has sizably better chances of winning a championship. He's in the championship fight this year than Rosenqvist would do. It is a fact. And I think from that perspective, it does feel like a backwards move. Like, obviously, if this is their thing and they really want to win the Triple Crown as a team, then yeah, fine. Then Rosenqvist is a better option for the immediate future. But I think if you're just looking at it from that wider point of view, it does feel backwards. Like, I think it's very valid points you make, to be fair, about change management structures and just the team being more stable. But there's, it's failed in the past, so there's no guarantee that it's definitely going to work out on a second try for Rosenqvist. And I'm not sure I agree with so much emphasis being put on the Indy 500. I think obviously we don't need to go into how big the 500 is and whatever. It is obviously the biggest race in the world, and of course they want to win the 500. But they also have Pato O'Ward, who is one of the best drivers at the Speedway. Brian Hunter-Ray signed again in this extra car, which purely they put on so they can try and win at the Speedway. They have Dixon, who's won at the Speedway. He's led more laps than anyone ever at the Speedway. So do you really need to...
as well, by the way.
TK as well, obviously, at the helm. Do you really need to sacrifice a driver who is a prodigious talent, arguably the biggest prospect among the young crop of drivers at the moment? Do you really need to sacrifice him over signing a guy who didn't really work out with the team in the past, just because you want to win the 500 and have 4 cars to do that rather than 3? And I think sacrificing the entire season over having 1 extra car that could win the 500 when you already have 3 cars that are in with a great shot, it just doesn't really make much sense to me. It just feels to me like they're almost disregarding the rest. And that's not to say that O'Ward can't win a championship or Dixon might still be able to win a championship. I doubt Rosenqvist's ability to win a championship unless the team makes a massive step forward and he makes a giant step forward to be on a par with someone like O'Ward. But I just personally think it's a crazy move to, like I don't begrudge them signing Dixon to replace Siegel. That's absolutely fine. The Dixon signing, I don't have any issues with that. And it's not to say that I think Rosenqvist is a horrible signing. It's just in the context of Lundgaard, who, he's had a tough ride of things on ovals as well, because he's been at RLL and he was very vocal about the fact that he had to essentially relearn them because RLL was so bad. And Arrow McLaren have had cars on ovals that are pretty on the edge. You look at some of the moments that O'Ward has had, that's not going to be easy to drive. And I don't think Lundgaard is an elite oval driver by any stretch. I think he's a good oval driver. He's had a couple of decent finishes. He's nothing more than that. But you mentioned Kanaan being there at the helm. They've got Hunter Ray now in this leadership capacity. These are people who should have been helping Lundgaard to develop on ovals, rather than thinking, yeah, okay, we'll just bin him off so we can have one extra car that can compete at the 500 and we'll just sacrifice the chance to win the championship. That's the way that, personally, I am looking at this situation, that they are really kind of narrowing their vision, putting all the eggs in one basket and taking away, basically handicapping themselves a little bit on what matters for most of the year.
One point I want to raise is McLaren have said this is a very long-term vision, ultimately to make them competitive and win championships. I don't think they're going to start winning stuff next year. They might, but again, it's about Dixon being implemented into the team in this leadership role and Rosenqvist to continue to provide that support and feedback. It feels like we've had this a little bit too much of a long-term vision at McLaren. Long-term vision when they start to become IndyCar champions and back up what they do in Formula One. Then it's expand to 3 cars. That's going to be our long-term vision to help win a championship with this many cars competitive. And then the one I really think about is when Theo Pourchaire was replaced by Nolan Siegel, because, this guy's the future, and he's a long-term option that can be at the team for a long time and win us a lot of championships and have a lot of success. It just doesn't feel like the first time they've made what feels like a bit of an impulse decision saying that it's going to have a long-term benefit. And you look now and it's like, ultimately, the long-term benefit seems to be Lundgaard, because he's a guy who came into the team. He exceeded the expectations massively. His comparison was Rosenqvist and Rossi, and he blew them out the water within about 3 or 4 races compared to what they were doing. And you're like, okay, wow, they finally found the guy after all this time who can match O'Ward. Comes into the season, he raises the benchmark even further. He's pretty much beating O'Ward at every road street race. That benchmark's raised high. They've got a guy who can compete with O'Ward, who's giving good technical feedback, is still young, and is clearly the guy who can take it to below. He would naturally look to anybody else as your future. And suddenly, no, that's not our future. We need to bring these people in to make our future further down the line. When is this going to stop of McLaren trying to work out when their future is and their plans to win an IndyCar championship? It's just, I don't understand how Rosenqvist is suddenly going to go from 10th in the standings of McLaren 3 years ago to competing for or leading that team to championships. As I said, the points earlier, he might do better than 10th, but there's no way Rosenqvist wins a championship with McLaren, surely.
But ultimately, it seems like that's not what they've brought him in for. They've brought him in for one race. And you make a really good point about the long-term vision, because if you do have that long-term vision, you buy into the fact that with another year or 2 of development and, another few oval races at the back end of this year where Lundgaard, it would be quite amusing if he went and performed really well. He can easily become a very strong oval driver and Indy 500 contender, because a lot of drivers who haven't come from this background have taken time. I know Palou obviously hit the ground running at Indianapolis specifically, but he wasn't a stellar oval driver for a good few years. And, that's why it's so... It makes, it doesn't not make sense to me, because I understand their rationale. I just don't agree with the rationale necessarily, because at the moment, Lundgaard is, he is basically ovals away from being probably the most complete current driver in terms of the frontrunners in the series other than Alex Palou. I don't think there is much denying that, really. I know there's obviously Kirkwoods, there's Malukas and these other young names, but I think Lundgaard is particularly close to being completely complete. I don't know whether you've got a point to make on that, Dan.
Do you know how long it took Felix Rosenqvist to get a top 5 and an oval outside the Indy 500?
Go for it. I don't know. I wouldn't want to guess.
5 years. That's not a guy who's adapted to ovals extremely quickly. And I'm sure the Pelot stat won't be too dissimilar.
He's adapted to ovals now, so that's what they seem to count.
But like Lundgaard had a good run at Nashville last year. He was on for the top 5 for a mechanical.
He finished like 6th at Indianapolis in his first year with Arrow McLaren. Like, and he's
7th, yeah.
And he's been, he's even with RLL, like he put in some solid drives from the back of the field through to kind of the high teens at Indy as well. So it's not like he's been horrific and he's just been 2 laps down. I think like they're making it out like it's been some disaster, and I just do not agree with it. Like he is a top driver, and a top driver is adaptable enough to learn, and he is learning. We're seeing progress. He qualified 3rd at Nashville last year, and I know he had an issue in the race, but I thought that was a decent step for. I don't know, qualifying is not everything on ovals, but I think that was a promising sign. I just think I've seen enough promising signs, and ultimately he's been not with O'Ward, he's been with Siegel on ovals, which I guess is a bit of a marker. But Siegel's a guy who's come through the ranks racing on ovals, has more experience on ovals, so it's not a particularly horrible reflection. I just think it's, I mean, you've got to lay bare the stats. Reiterating what I said earlier, 11 podiums in 28 races. Rosenqvist had 3 in 48. I mean, it's night and day. And up until Mid-Ohio, he was their only winner and only podium sister this season. I mean, Canano always goes on about results doing the talking. Like, has he been whispering it? Has he been on a Zoom call on mute? Like, what's happening here?
Well, this is kind of my point. It's like, what more did they? Right, I know what they want. What more they wanted him to do? They wanted him to perform on ovals, but it's like with Pelot isn't like he has become a great oval driver, but he was still winning championships whilst not being very good at ovals. And Lundgaard kind of feels like he was at the same level. Like he was
again. It's like these ambitions, like the championship just doesn't seem to matter as much, which I just find wild. Like, and maybe that is part of the Dixon factor, is that long term they want in 2 or 3 years to be in that position where he's laid the foundations, and they feel like that's what it's going to take. And that, but then Lundgaard could go and have an incredible end to the season and win the championship. I mean, what do you do then? Sorry, I did cut you off there.
You can't do anything. One other point I also did want to make is, this team feels very tailored to O'Ward all of a sudden. They've got his best mate in, and they've got Dixon in, who is going to give sound technical feedback and all his experience from Ganassi. Like, ultimately, Dixon probably is a little bit past his best in regards to winning a championship. Rosenqvist, as we've discussed, is a reliable pair of hands, but he won't win you a championship. And that leaves you O'Ward as your guy who's going to win you a championship. And like that, I mean, that's a lot of faith in him. Like, you could equally put the same amount of faith in Lundgaard, but O'Ward is commercially sound. He is the guy that you want to have in your team for marketing purposes. He's a quick guy. He's in his mid to late 20s now, so he's still got several strong years still in front of him. So it just feels like that's the direction they're going, and we're going all into him, Pat O'Ward, an IndyCar championship, and hopefully, or even more so, an Indy 500, which was weird because he's been so close before, and he's lost a few through very little fault of his own.
Like, and he's put a lot of pressure on that team now in May that they're making all of these moves solely for the 500. I mean, which is in a race which is such a lottery, exactly. And ultimately, I don't. And maybe this is just that it's the Arrow McLaren way, it's McLaren's way, that they do things a little bit differently. But this is not behaving like a Penske or a Ganassi, who, I really liked your theory when you kind of first presented to me last week. And it just isn't behaving like a top team if they are kind of just wanting it to all be nice and harmonious for O'Ward. Because you look at a Penske and ultimately they're not necessarily performing to the standard now, but you look at a Malukas and McLaughlin and a Newgarden, and they're all, you don't look at any of those drivers and, obviously Malukas had a better season, whatever, and think, oh yeah, one of them is like clearly just your top dog and you're putting all eggs in that basket. That's just not how it works. It's not how IndyCar works. But maybe it's a bit of the F1 mindset. I don't know, but it's just not behaving like a traditional kind of top team is the way I would put it.
And I don't want to sound dramatic, but is O'Ward a guy you put all your eggs into one basket to try and get him a championship? Like Palou, okay, yeah, fair enough, that's going to happen. Even at Kirkwood or Malukas, but feels like O'Ward has been so close so many times, or in the fourth or the third to sixth range for so long. It's like, is he good enough? And this is the thing. It's hard to know what level McLaren are really performing at, I think, in many ways. And this is going to give us a really good indicator, especially on Dixon's side, of how good McLaren actually are, because Rossi came in underwhelming. Rosenqvist came in underwhelming. Lundgaard, overwhelming, but again, the expectations were different there. It's hard to know how good Arrow McLaren are as a team, is the bottom line of it. Like, I don't know. And that's going to be very telling as we get into early next year.
So I guess this kind of just leaves us with, what does Christian Lundgaard do now? And I mean, like, it clearly must sting for him. Like, he seemed not particularly happy after his podium at Mid-Ohio. I thought he looked pretty downcast, and it definitely fed up of all the questions, because obviously it wasn't official at that point. And I mean, Tony Kanaan came out after the race and was saying, oh, nothing's decided yet, nothing's signed, and less than 24 hours later, everything comes out in the ether and it's true, which I found like pretty nuts, to be honest. But yeah, Lundgaard looked dismayed throughout the weekend. It's going to be a weird end to the season.
Of note, in the press conference, Lundgaard did not mention O'Ward once, and O'Ward did not mention Lundgaard once in a 1-2 finish.
Interesting. It is certainly interesting. And actually, just on that point of those two, I think it is worth just circling back to, this has been a team for a long time that has just had O'Ward as their guy. And I think there has been definitely an emphasis, and maybe what they're doing now maybe almost goes back on this, but to have multiple chargers at the front end, then maybe not go back on it. You can't write off Dixon as much as he is probably a little bit in decline, but so much emphasis on having two chargers at the front. And this is the third time they've locked out the front row in the last couple of years, and obviously a 1-2 finish. And it's just wild that you can have a 1-2 finish and 24 hours later, one of those two drivers, after this half decade of trying to find two guys that can regularly fight at the front, you just decide to ditch one. I mean, it's wild. I think what's even more wild is the fact that, as much as Lundgaard is probably feeling pretty pissed off now, he has a pretty good chance, you've got to say, of falling upwards and falling upwards into the vacant number 9 car at Chip Ganassi Racing, which we've got no insight on that. But if Ganassi, I mean, ultimately, maybe they want to go for some proper wildcard and unproven products, but for me,
Alex Palou in 2021, to make clear.
Yes, exactly. But if you look at IndyCar, I mean, Marcus Armstrong has re-signed with Meyershank Racing. He's a guy that I would have said has a pretty good shot, but that's not going to happen. You've got to ultimately look at Lundgaard. I mean, if I'm looking purely from my perspective, if I was there, it'd be Lundgaard versus VK for that seat. And Lundgaard is the one who's proven himself, and maybe VK would fall more into that wildcard category. But if you are Ganassi, I mean, surely it'd be a no-brainer, really, to think, oh, Lundgaard's free. Let's get one over on a team that we've had a bit of beef with in the past, obviously the whole Palou saga, and come and take Lundgaard on board and win the Indy 500 with him next year. And I mean, I guess that would be pretty damn sweet for Lundgaard as well. And yeah, ultimately it could be really, really good for him that this has happened. I'm mentioning VK a bit to a completely different degree, but VK kind of leaving ECR and being allowed to flourish a little bit. Lundgaard leaving Arrow McLaren, where he is flourishing, obviously, and is doing really, really well. But it's a team that's been a bit of a mess, and it was only last month that O'Ward was pointing towards the fact they're still in kind of a transformation. They might have to take another step backwards to go forwards again. It could work really well for Lundgaard that he's kind of getting out of that environment and joining the team who is just stably the absolute best and the benchmark and the gold standards in the series, which would be pretty amusing.
I've said this a couple of times. If you're Chip Ganassi, you're absolutely laughing. Ultimately, Dixon's not performing at a level where he's going to win you more championships, but you have to keep him on because he's got Dixon, all the work he's done for your team in the last 2 decades and a half. And ultimately, in a couple of years' time, he's going to have a difficult challenge of who does he find to replace Scott Dixon in number 9 car. And then suddenly you've got your guy right in front of you. You've got a guy who is still very young, has got a lot of years left in him, has shown solid pace, is somebody who can definitely win you a championship. you've got your guy on a silver platter, and you've fulfilled your very difficult job of replacing Scott Dixon a couple of years early, and McLaren have done you a favour there. And again, we'll touch more on this if things happen and dominoes start to fall, but the prospect of Lundgaard and Palou in the same team, the two best road course racers, is anyone going to win a road course apart from Chip Ganassi Racing in the next couple of years? Because that's going to be some proper formidable lineup, and it's going to be great seeing those two kind of go at it. If Lundgaard's level is to be matched at Chip Ganassi Racing to compare to what he does to Palou now, I mean, that's just such a fantastic prospect. And I mean, I think it's a pretty good deal on the Ganassi side.
Yeah, the only fear I have is they do go a different route, and I know there's been reporting from people like Marshall Pruitt that they maybe consider like an F2 prospect or someone similar who is that absolute wild card like Palou when he came over from Super Formula. And I know obviously Palou did the 1 year in IndyCar with Coyne, but something similar to that. But yeah, if they did go down that route, I would suddenly be a bit concerned for Lundgaard. Like I guess Andretti's the obvious one. I know Marcus Ericsson's had a pretty decent season and has probably been enough on a par with his teammates to warrant staying. But then if Lundgaard, suddenly comes free, is still free, and Ganassi don't decide to sign him, I guess Andretti would be the no-brainer as well there. And then you look at a lineup of Kirk with Lundgaard and Power. I mean, then you've got to, because I would say that's still a slight upward step from Arrow McLaren personally, not sizably, but it would still be a good move for Lundgaard. I think the big fear is just if they re-sign Ericsson because they get tired of waiting, Ganassi go down a different route, and Lundgaard ends up at JHR or somewhere, which would be extremely unfair. No disrespect to those teams, but to see him going to the back of the grid would be, and it'd be pretty galling, to be honest. So I just hope someone snaps him up quickly. And you got to say respect to Arrow McLaren, who, according to reports, have got rid of the kind of window where Lundgaard isn't allowed to speak to other teams. So, fair play to them for that, at least. So, yeah, one to watch. But I would love to see Palou against Lundgaard in the same team. I mean, that would be really exciting.
Imagine Andretti, you've got your best street course racer in the series, you've got arguably the best road course racer in the series, and you've got Power leading the charge of short ovals. What a lineup that is. That is quite a prospect. But I mean, yeah, as you say, it'd be a crime if Lundgaard is in one of the top seats next year, and Marchand Racing will actually have a seat. Now Rosenqvist is gone, could he be an option there? There's a couple of places that I'm sure he'll be looking around. But I mean, you have to feel a bit bad for him. Like I said to say, he couldn't have really done much more. He completely blew the expectations out of the water. It felt like he was cruising towards a contract. It seemed like a no-brainer for him. And it's like suddenly, well, actually, his future's looking rather bleak.
I think just to put into context, like how absurd it really does feel this. Like, I mean, he was asked, and maybe in hindsight, like there were some signs after Road America that things had already gone down in whatever way, because when he was asked about kind of his contract and whatever, he was pretty short in answering and saying, the win never hurts, does it? But that was kind of as far as it went, really. But I just want to go back to the last paragraph of that, the last sentence, really, of that piece that I wrote after his Road America win. With the quote, "Well, it never hurts, does it?" he posed. Quite the opposite, as whether he leaves the race confused or preferably otherwise, Lundgaard continues to place himself in IndyCar's top bracket, and Arrow McLaren will not want to lose such a budding superstar. I wrote that 2 weeks ago, and look what's happened. I mean, I think, it's not like I've gone out with some bold belief there. That is the widespread belief within this IndyCar space. So, yeah, I think it's a big shock that this has all happened. Again, like we've spoken about why there is possibly some logic behind it, and they have their reasons, and their reasons, I mean, you can justify their reasons, but it still doesn't make it any more crazy, really, that a driver of that talent has just been released from his team, essentially.
And I guess on the other side of it, Nolan Siegel also has been confirmed to depart Arrow McLaren at the end of the season. This one obviously isn't as great of a shock. There was quite the ultimatum set at the start of the year that he has finished top 10 in the standings to be retained by the team. It became fairly obvious fairly quickly that was going to be unachievable. Siegel actually has had a better run of races, but ultimately it's still not at the standard McLaren they're going to be expecting. And we spoke about it a lot of the time, but it kind of felt like it was too big of a move too soon in his career. He wasn't ready for it. He had to adapt, but also people were expecting big results of him, and I think everyone kind of knew this was coming, really. So there's not really surprise. And ultimately, I think for him, it's trying to still find a drive, which I'm sure is possible. Like a lot of people have pointed him in the Rosenqvist direction. I don't know how valid or not that is, but some drivers just naturally thrive in smaller team environments. Like Rosenqvist was one, for example, who fared better at smaller teams than he did at bigger teams. And I think Nolan Siegel in his coin times had shown promising runs and had some decent outings. Obviously, there weren't very many of them. But with the opportunity to race in a small team with less pressure, that might give an opportunity to revitalise his career. And I'd like to see him do that at least for a year, just to gain some kind of indication of where he's really at before, we can really assess whether he's at the standard or not of IndyCar. And obviously, he does have a lot of backing that teams will be certainly interested in. But he was obviously the other one to depart with the news today.
I mean, he's still so young. It's easy to forget he's still only 21 years old. And, some drivers don't get to IndyCar until they're 25. So he can very easily hit the reset button and it not be any sort of disaster. Because I think this was a driver at the end of the day who was taken out in the middle of an Indy next season and kind of just placed into a top ride without, obviously did a couple of IndyCar races with Coyne and what have you. But, he was properly thrown into the deep end. And I think for a young driver, especially when it was that abrupt with no time to really prepare or adapt, that was always going to be a lot to ask, and that kind of put him on the back foot. And I know you can say, obviously, after a year or two with experience of everything, you should be seeing improvements. And I think we are genuinely seeing improvements, but he's just been so on the back foot from the start because it was such a lofty kind of move to have made at that point. So I think I would have loved to have seen him almost do the inverse and have that chance to do a year or two at one of the smaller teams. And I think he should be afforded that chance now, because it could be that he has 2 years in an environment where he doesn't have eyes on him, the constant talk and the pressure about the ride and, all of just the expectations that come with driving for the McLaren name. I just think it would be really handy for him. And we might see in those 2 years that he is a driver who deserves another shot at the top team. And we might see otherwise, but I would just love to see that for him. And I think it would be cruel for him to, because he's clearly a talented driver. He was showing that in Indy next when he was kind of plucked out by McLaren. There's a reason that he was identified. So I'd just like to see a chance for that talent to be allowed to flourish somewhere where there just isn't so much onus on, being a winner straight away, essentially.
And the other driver we need to touch on is Marcus Armstrong, who signed a new multi-year extension with Marchbank Racing this week as well. Of note, he now moves to the 60 car, so the 66, so it kind of comes across as he now inherits that team leader role from Rosenqvist as he departs the team. And one thing I really do take away from this is that Chip Ganassi obviously knew there would be a vacancy before Armstrong's contract was renewed. And when Armstrong last signed with the team, it was made clear by Chip Ganassi that Armstrong was still very much a Ganassi driver on loan at Marchbank Racing. It now feels that Ganassi's had an opportunity to place Armstrong in one of his seats. It feels like he's kind of declined that option. And it feels like those ties, obviously they're still in a technical partnership, but it feels kind of those ties maybe have weakened a little bit. And it kind of feels like he is an out-and-out Marchbank Racing driver now who's going to be leading that team rather than being eyed by Ganassi for one of their seats in the future. So that's something I kind of took away from that, which I thought was potentially of note. As I said, it felt to me as if he was ready for a Ganassi move. He's very similar to Dixon in many ways. Same as Lundgaard, to be honest. A very similar driving style, very composed, doesn't overreact. But I think the fact they haven't taken him up as an option for that seat quite more means that those official ties with Ganassi are probably coming to an end. But it secures his IndyCar future. He was one, I think, who would have gathered interest from a lot of the top teams. There were suggestions McLaren might have a look at him, but he is locked in with Marchbank Racing for the next couple of years.
But it did feel like Armstrong would be the natural Dixon replacement, but it felt like that was going to be the case like 2 or 3 more years down the line when he's really had a chance to even further establish himself. And I think he, I would have still, if he'd have got that drive, I wouldn't have really batted an eyelid because he has shown such progress, particularly last year.
We speak about Ganassi being brave of his decisions, and in seats and going for people who are unproven.
It's interesting. Like, I would like to know the rationale about not putting Armstrong in there, given that he has maintained such a core of Ganassi personnel, and this relationship has kind of existed. Well, it hasn't existed just for Armstrong by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of allowed them to keep ties. So for them to not call upon him, I mean, maybe it purely is the fact that, if they have the opportunity to sign Lundgaard, you're going to sign Lundgaard over Armstrong, off what we have seen anyway. But ultimately, Armstrong's shown very strong foundations at that team. I think it's been a really good environment to kind of allow him to develop, rather than kind of a bit like the Siegel point to a lesser extent, and be kind of forced to do all his development in the top team of Ganassi, and instead be kind of on this, I guess you could call it, satellite kind of program, obviously given he's got a lot of the same engineering core that he had when he was at Ganassi, and just feels logical really for the team in terms of maintaining continuity, and really for Armstrong as well. Like, if he's not to make the step up to Ganassi, he really gets the leadership role. He becomes the veteran driver of that team. So, yeah, just feels sensible, really.
That's the ones we've had kind of confirmed. And now you look at available seats. Ganassi is obviously the most attractive one to a lot of drivers. Andretti maybe lean towards Ericsson staying there. Dennis Haug is obviously one who had a relationship with Andretti coming into the season. They call upon him. Meyer Shank will be another attractive option to a lot of people. Helio Castroneves has been on the record to Brazilian media saying that the Kai Colette is certainly one they are looking at, and he has had a good couple of races for AJ Foyt Racing. So he's one that they're certainly looking at. AJ Foyt Racing might end up having both their seats open. Santino Ferrucci's future is looking rather uncertain currently. Rinus VK is another top player, as you mentioned, that he could find a space somewhere like Shank or somewhere else. And in the driving market, that will leave two seats open. Hunkost, Coin Racing will have both their seats open. Verho Lettman Lanigan seem to await whether they want to retain Mick Schumacher for 2027 or not. Obviously, Lou Austin, Graham Rahal locked in there. Ed Carpenter Racing are fully locked in for next year, as well as Team Penske, so there won't be any changes there. So a lot to play out. Like, this is ultimately the first of very many dominoes. This is ultimately the biggest domino to fall, and you'll have plenty more from here. Maybe not quite the same magnitude, but you never quite know. So this is where kind of silly season already kicks off.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the next biggest player is probably VK now. I think his performance at Mid-Ohio, as we will...
Over Lundgaard?
No, next biggest player after Lundgaard.
After Lundgaard. I guess the next one is where Lundgaard goes, is ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think after Lundgaard, VK is the next biggest player in this. I think Mid-Ohio obviously proved that. We'll get onto that a lot when we get to the race review about how impressive that was, but possibly could have been on the podium, finished fourth in the JHR car, which was supremely impressive. And I think, I don't know, I just fear that once again, a real top move is going to pass him by if Ganassi do indeed decide to sign Lundgaard. I think if I was a VK, I'd be really putting forward my case for that drive, because I also think he's a driver who could go there and really excel, and he deserves that opportunity. I think he's proven that now over seven seasons. I think particularly the last couple, going to a couple of struggling environments and really maximising. So he's the biggest player, I would say, other than Lundgaard. I think that's not to say Andretti will go out their way to sign him, because I think it would probably be sensible just to re-sign Ericsson. He's improved a little bit, have a bit of stability there, I think would just make sense, which would make me fear that another driver market season is going to pass by without VK getting a really top driver. I think Meyer Shank would kind of be in that bracket, but if Ganassi, for instance, do sign Lundgaard, then you're kind of in a place going to Meyer Shank where you're going there just for Meyer Shank, and it's not like you're going there, and that's not a bad thing. Like, he still would have an opportunity for podiums for sure, and to possibly win races, but like, you're going there knowing that, if Ganassi ultimately have Simpson, who's not going to be leaving because of how valuable he is from a financial perspective to that team, and then you've got Palou and Lundgaard, that's not a lineup that's going to budge either. So that pipeline goes, and then you kind of look, would it be reasonable for VK to go to Foyt? Because the Penske relationship is bloody confusing, and we don't hear anything about it like we do with Shank Ganassi. It's just confusing. Like, I don't know what's going on there. I feel like everyone has different views on what's actually happening. But like, VK to Foyt, if that opens up a Penske pipeline, and if, for instance, Newgarden would leave at the end of next season, which again, I have no idea if that would happen, but I've kind of touted for a while that I would love to see VK at Penske. I think he would just fit them all perfectly. So he, for me, is after Lundgaard is absolutely the next piece of the puzzle. I know mentions of Collette as well. If I was Collette, I'd probably stay put, to be honest. He seems in a pretty good place with Foyt. So, yeah, we'll see. But I guess if we have an opportunity to go to Shank and team up with Castro and Evans, that would also be pretty cool for him as a Brazilian. So we shall see. Purely speculation. It's speculation season.
So that's kind of it for the driver market. Obviously, a lot of news in the last couple of days. Let's hope we have a quieter news week before the IndyCar show hits Nashville in a couple of weeks. As we said, our Mid-Ohio race review will be out very shortly. We'll also have Indy Next debrief coming up in the next week or so. We'll also have another interview with Indy Next driver coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll also have our standard episode next Tuesday before Nashville. We just had a bit of high. I'm not going to get confused there. So that's it for the driving market. As always, thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.